I call the member for Corangamite.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise and speak on this omnibus bill. As at the government's third repeal day, we have made decisions designed to decrease the $65 billion regulatory cost burden by a massive $2.5 billion. Mr Deputy Speaker, to date we've implemented $1.57 billion in red tape savings, with another $800 million in the pipeline. What we're seeing now is that Australia has now the most precise, comprehensive and transparent program to reverse the growing costs of red tape on the Australian economy. Very proudly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Coalition Government has now repealed more than 10,300 legislative instruments and introduced legislation to repeal over 2,700 Acts of Parliament. The Coalition set itself a target to reduce the regulatory burden by $1 billion a year. Not only did we exceed that net target by more than double in our first year, we are now on our way to meeting a fresh new $1 billion target for 2015. For the first time in Australian history, a Commonwealth government has undertaken a thorough and accurate stocktake of all federal regulatory costs and is consistently measuring and reducing the cost of Commonwealth government red tape on Australian businesses, organisations, families and individuals. In the last year of the former Labor government, Commonwealth regulation was costing Australians approximately $65 billion per year, and that's a remarkable 4.2% of GDP. So now, for the first time, Mr Deputy Speaker, a Commonwealth government has, with a very high degree of accuracy, publicly reported to Parliament a downturn in the total amount and cost of federal regulation. Now, as we've heard in some of the contributions before the Parliament today, some of the key measures in the autumn 2015 repeal day include implementing additional functionality for MyGov users to allow customers to update their details in one place using the MyGov Tell Us Once service. Now, that will help users obtain secure and convenient access to online services with a single account and one set of credentials, and I know that in the past that's been very frustrating for users, so that will really streamline things considerably and make a real difference. Identity checks will be made simpler and easier for retailers and consumers when purchasing new prepaid mobile phones. That's annual compliance savings of $6.2 million. These red tape savings have done things like lift restrictions on using personal electronic devices so travellers can use their PEDs during all phases of flights. That's a saving of $17.7 million. There's been an improvement to the ATO website so that 6 million Australians can find relevant information more quickly. That saving and that time saving, Mr Deputy Speaker, has produced an annual compliance saving of $48.5 million. It will also now be easier to implement monthly PAYG payments for certain businesses. So businesses choosing this method of payment will only need to calculate their actual instalment income on a quarterly basis. That produces an annual compliance savings of $2.7 million. The 457 visa program has been reformed, streamlining the processing of sponsorship, nomination and visa applications to reduce the time and cost to businesses. We've also removed the requirement for heavy vehicle operators of B-double truck combinations registered under the Federal Interstate Registration Scheme to fit additional spray suppression devices. Annual compliance savings of $8.3 million. So we're just seeing, Mr Deputy Speaker, these are very specific, in many cases very specific changes to the regulatory burden on particular businesses or industry sectors. But they're very, very important to that industry sector. So when I talk to small businesses in my electorate of Corangamite, and very proudly there are about 11,800 small businesses operating in Corangamite, Mr Deputy Speaker, I say it's not enough just to say we need to fix the red tape burden. businesses need to actually specify with a lot of detail what is that red tape burden. What do we as a government need to do? We understand the problem, but what's the solution? And what we're seeing, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a government that addresses the problem but also specifically looks at the solution. I should add that students who receive government payments are now able to change their details online at a time that best suits them without being required to contact a call centre or attend a service centre, and that's annual compliance savings of $2.7 million. I think we all know how frustrating it can be to be in a line, on a call centre line. I think perhaps my worst frustration is dealing with the Telstra call centre, which when I ran a small business was perhaps my biggest frustration and still drives me nuts when I have to ring Telstra. So anything that we as a government can do to streamline these processes, to minimise the time that people are waiting on phone calls, of course, produces a direct benefit to that particular business. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Coalition's goal is to make life easier for Australians, to make it easier for businesses to invest and to create more jobs. That's our focus. It's innovation, jobs growth, opportunity. And in my electorate of Corangamite, we've got a very strong focus on the smart jobs of the future. And I have to say it was with absolute pride, and I spoke about this in the Federation Chamber this morning, that last week I helped open the Carbon Revolution Factory, which is an absolute hub of innovation, assisted, of course, by the member for Sturt, the new Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, Christopher Pyne, a great example of what our government is doing to drive jobs growth in our region through the Geelong Region Innovation and Investment Fund, because in our region, as with all other parts of Australia, we know how important it is to drive those jobs, to drive those opportunities. So $15 million of the Geelong Region Innovation and Investment Fund, all of that money, while announced by the previous government, has been delivered by our government. It's created in excess of 700 jobs. Very disappointingly, the state Labor government committed $7.5 million to that fund. Now, Daniel Andrews and state Labor have reneged on the promise to commit that money to the fund. That is a terrible, appalling decision by state Labor, another terrible broken promise which has a direct impact on jobs in our region. And again, I call on Daniel Andrews, on state Labor, to commit and keep that promise to deliver that $7.5 million into the Geelong Region Innovation and Investment Fund. And I see from the likes of the member for Corio completely silent, not saying a word about this terrible broken promise which has a direct impact on jobs. So that money is critical for our region, and Daniel Andrews cannot walk away from that commitment. He cannot walk away from that promise. We're just about to announce the next round of funding under the GRIF, as it's called, which will deliver more jobs for many businesses across our region, but of course with another $7.5 million it could make an enormous difference. Very proudly, very recently, the national $14 million Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre was announced for Geelong, and that will be established at Warm Ponds in the wonderful Deakin University Industry Precinct. And that is going to be a game changer, Mr Deputy Speaker, for driving innovation and smart jobs in the advanced manufacturing sector, with a very strong focus on future fibres, because the work that we are doing as a city in future fibres, underpinned by Carbon Nexus, Carbon Revolution in carbon fibre, is quite extraordinary. I should also add that as part of our government's drive for jobs growth, for opportunity, for innovation, we have a very strong focus on investing in infrastructure. Across the region that I proudly represent, we're rolling out the NBN to some 40,000 premises. Right across the Golden Plains, the Surf Coast, the Colac-Otway region, a region that was forgotten by the previous government. The big challenge is the NBN rollout in Geelong, and I'm advocating very hard to the new Minister for Communications, Senator Mitch Fifield, that this rollout must be expedited in Geelong. But we're getting on with the business of rolling out that infrastructure, and for country communities, no program better demonstrates our commitment than our mobile phone base mobile phone base station program to fix mobile black spots across the country. Now $160 million has been committed, 10 new mobile base stations across Corangamite, and that's making an enormous difference in places like Carwarren, Gellibrand, Dereel, right across those areas affected by bushfire risk. And we know how important it is that communications are at their very best with bushfire being such a high risk throughout the Otways and many other parts along the Surf Coast and throughout Victoria. Mr Deputy Speaker, we're very proudly duplicating the Princess Highway between Warn Ponds and Colac. We're upgrading the Great Ocean Road in partnership with the Victorian Government. Of course, $50 million, 25 committed by our government, 25 by the previous Liberal government. And this is the road that federal Labor forgot. This is the road that they campaigned against. They saw no value in investing in the Great Ocean Road. That's federal Labor for you. But this is a project which is vital for our region, and it's an iconic road, the centrepiece of more than $2 million of economic activity in our region, and we're very, very proud about what that's doing in Lorne and Anglesea, down at Separation Creek, Wyre River. Very, very proud. I'm also proud, Mr Deputy Speaker, to have launched a local campaign to duplicate the rail track between the South Geelong and Warn Ponds stations. This is a very important project for our region. We've seen the regional rail link, and about $1.5 billion towards the regional rail link was actually delivered by our government. Of course, it was started by the previous Labor government. But there are big problems with the regional rail link. The new timetables have forgotten country communities, particularly in Colac. The new timetable no longer allows people living in Colac to get to work on time if they're working in Melbourne. It's even a struggle if they're working in Geelong. So again, we've seen the new Polwarth candidate, Richard Reardon, commit to 6 additional services coming to and from Colac, weekly 6 extra services per week, which is fantastic. And Labor cares so much about this issue that they haven't even run a candidate in Polwarth. They have completely forgotten the Polwarth electorate and the Colac-Otway region, but it's terrific to see that Richard Reardon, the Polwarth candidate, has tackled this issue head-on, and under the leadership of Matthew Guy, the opposition leader, has addressed what is a critical issue. But I was very proud to take Warren Truss, the Deputy Prime Minister, of course, the Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. I showed him this very important project. It will mean a very big difference for people commuting from Marshall, from Warn Ponds, and right along the railway to Colac. The single line really inhibits the number of passenger train services that can operate each day. Before 8 o'clock from Geelong, there's some 13 services, but from Warn Ponds and Marshall, it's about half of that. So I can say, Mr Deputy Speaker, not only are we delivering this important infrastructure to help drive jobs growth, to help small businesses, but we're also fighting for new infrastructure, and that's very, very important. Of course, the other critical jobs growth opportunity for not just our region but for Australia is our free trade agreements with China, with South Korea and with Japan, and particularly for farmers and for agriculture. And I have to say it's with great disappointment that we are seeing a reckless and irresponsible campaign against the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. If this agreement is not ratified and the enabling legislation not passed quickly in this parliament, agriculture will miss out on 2 rounds of tariff cuts, and $300 million in revenue to the agriculture sector. So this is an incredibly important initiative and incredibly important economic reform for Corangamite, for farmers, for agriculture and for the whole of Australia. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's my great pleasure to speak on this omnibus bill. It's my great pleasure to support the government in its very strong efforts and achievements to cut the regulatory burden on small business. And it's my great pleasure as the member for Corangamite to continue my fight for jobs, for infrastructure investment and for the environment. Thank you very much.